So, welcome back to another video. Today's lesson is actually kind of going along with the last one. We've been talking about balancing equations, and so today what we're going to do is we're still going to talk about balancing, but this time what we're going to look at is word problems. I know, you go back to math and you think, no, I don't want to do word problems, but it's really not that complicated. It's just a matter of combining everything you've already learned. So let me give you an example. The problem we're going to look at today is we are going to look at iron 3 chloride. Let me make that a 3. Iron 3 chloride, okay, plus calcium hydroxide. And forgive me for writing so big. It's hard to write with your hand on an iPad. Yields, good old yield sign, iron 3 hydroxide. Again, got to get my Roman numerals in there. Hydroxide plus calcium chloride. So you have to be able to balance this equation. The kicker here is I don't see any formulas, I don't see any numbers, which means you have to find the formulas. Okay, so now we've got to go back to this whole discussion of ionic and covalent compounds. We have to remember how to take iron 3 chloride and turn it into a formula. How to take calcium hydroxide and turn it into a formula. That's really the focus of what we're doing. So, we're going to start with our iron 3 chloride, okay? All right, so if I come back to this, iron 3 chloride, and I'm going to see if I can smush the reactants in here, plus calcium hydroxide. Calcium hydroxide. We have to remember everything we've learned about polyatomic ions, about Roman numerals, transition metals. So we got to think iron chloride. Well, we know it's made of iron. We know it's made of chlorine. But we can't just stick this 3 down here. Everybody wants to do that. If you remember what we learned before, it's all about the crisscross. So iron 3 has a charge of 3. Chloride has a charge of 1. So my formula becomes Fe1Cl3. Hopefully this is coming back to you. Okay, plus, well, that's easy enough. The next one was calcium hydroxide. Again, got to know calcium is Ca, and you have to remember that hydroxide is a polyatomic. It's OH. So now, again, we get to crisscross. Calcium, if you go to your periodic table, has a charge of 2. It's in that second column. Hydroxide, which you had to memorize, has a charge of 1. So when I look at my crisscross method, I've got CaOH2. And remember, OH is a polyatomic, so in order to distribute that 2 appropriately, it's got to be in brackets. So there's my reactants. I've taken the words, I've turned them into actual chemical formulas, which then I'll work with balancing in a minute. So now let's look at the products, and then I'll come back to my other thought. My products here, and I'm sorry we're having to do this on 2 screens, are iron 3 hydroxide. And in the interest of space, I'm going to write, I'll write it all out. Hydroxide plus calcium chloride. Okay, I'm going to put calc, humor me, okay, chloride. And again, it's crisscross time. Okay, iron is a 3, hydroxide is a 1. Calcium is a 2, chlorine is a 1. This is exactly what we were doing before. Okay, so Fe1OH3. And again, you got to remember those brackets. Fe1OH3. Okay, Ca1Cl2. Don't need any brackets. It's not a polyatomic. There's my products. So, when I put this all together, what I end up with is, okay, iron 3 chloride, FeCl3, plus calcium hydroxide, CaOH2, yields, okay, iron 3 hydroxide, FeOH3, plus calcium chloride, CaCl2. And then you can balance it. Then you go back to the previous lesson and it's all about the balancing. So the trick with word problems is twofold. One, the biggest thing you've got to do with word problems is you have to be able to take the words calcium hydroxide, iron 3 hydroxide, and you have to be able to turn them into formulas. Okay, that's the biggest challenge. The second challenge, which we're going to talk about briefly, is actually not as bad. And that's you have to use context clues to figure out the equation. In the first one I gave you, I actually wrote iron 3 chloride plus, yields plus, but they don't always do that. Sometimes it will say, and I'm going to keep this one brief, calcium chloride decomposes, into calcium and chlorine. All right? There's no arrows in here. Look, I'll even put an and, sorry. There's no arrows, There's no plus signs. So this is the context clues. I have to figure out calcium chloride, that's one of my chemicals, decomposes, that's the reaction. So when you have your arrow, you're looking for things like yields, results, produces, creates, decomposes, reacts. Usually you can kind of figure that out. The and is kind of your context clue for my plus sign. So for my plus signs, lots of times it's and. Sometimes it says plus. Sometimes it'll say reacts with. And if you think about the basics of a chemical equation, it's really simply context clues of figuring out what's what. All right? So hopefully this was helpful. Work on those word equations. It's really back to ionic compounds and naming. If you need to go back to Unit 6, review those videos. See you next time.